So I have an idea that I've cooked up and we'll put it out there publicly and you're my expert. So you tell me about this. So you know how the first time you begin to talk to your hospitalists about how they'll be measured and evaluated on their own length of stay. You've had this conversation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The deflation in your voice says it all.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I've never as a physician advisor had to go to a physician and say that, but I have certainly been a hospitalist and had my leaders come to me and be like, here's your score sheet. Here's your length of stay.
Okay, fair enough. Here's your score sheet. We're keeping score. It's a golf match. So here we go back to this crucial conversation that somebody's having with a hospitalist who says, well, it's not my fault. Okay, here's what I offer up as a tentative solution. Have you ever had the fortune of staying at a Ritz-Carlton?
Hold tight. Wait till the party's over. Hold tight. We're in for nasty weather. There has got to be a way. Burning down the house.
Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and this podcast brings you the hottest and most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership today. This week's guest, Dr. Clarissa Barnes, is no stranger to physician leadership and may be one of the most impactful leaders that you've never heard about, at least until today anyway. Dr. Barnes joins us today from the great state of South Dakota. The daughter of a family physician, Dr. Barnes earned her bachelor's degree in chemistry and political science from the University of South Dakota, which tells you everything you need to know about her, perhaps. Dr. Barnes then went east to earn her medical degree from Johns Hopkins, and where she stayed to complete her internal medicine residency. Later, Dr. Barnes earned her MBA at Creighton University's Heider College of Business. Currently, Dr. Barnes is serving as the Chief Medical Officer for Medicaid for the state of South Dakota, having just finished her term as the President and CEO of the American College of Physician Advisors. Clarissa, welcome to the show.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a privilege and an honor to have you. I hope I got that background right. Did I leave anything out?
No, and it's sort of weird to hear everything repeated back to you. It's like, oh man, I went to school a long time.
Yeah, it's kind of like a history and physical, isn't it? So are you still seeing patients and teaching? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I still do hospitalist shifts at the main hospital in town. And then with that, there's residents that we see as well. I'm not teaching as much as I used to just because of, you can't do everything.
Yeah, and we've talked about this, and I'm very excited to throw a bunch of questions at you because you're in a really unique space, and there are not a lot of people in the position such as yours that still provide clinical care and the teaching, as you mentioned. And perhaps it's not as often as you would like, but it's still meaningful, obviously, or you wouldn't do it, right?
Yeah, no, that is, I think, a common physician leader struggle is sort of like when to convert 100% versus when to sort of, try and keep your toe in. I'm in a weird sort of place where I'm still working, 100% administratively, but trying to keep that relevance and sort of ear to the ground, so to speak.
Yeah, it is probably one of the most common questions I get when I teach and lecture. When we first connected, I have to admit, I was a little unsure how to approach the discussion. There's so much to talk about, so we're going to break it down, kind of like breaking chemical bonds and while examining political structures at the same time, like when you were an undergrad. So I'm going to bring you back.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to bring you forward. And what was up with that degree? We haven't talked about that. What were you thinking?
I was thinking that I really liked chemistry for one. I had an amazing high school chemistry teacher, and I just thought that was so fascinating. But I thought it was relevant to the fact that I eventually wanted to be a physician. But I went to college thinking that I was not going to be a full-time practicing physician, that eventually I was going to go back and do. At the time, I thought I was going to go back and, be at the CDC. My plan was, I was like, I'm going to lead the CDC. That's my end goal. And so I was really looking at, how do we combine medicine and the, work that the government does, and political science felt like a really natural fit. So I could get a little bit of experience in both. And realistically, once you start medicine, that is your life, right? You're 100% in. And so I thought undergrad was a great time to sort of do a bunch of other stuff that I wasn't going to get to do later.
Well, I think that's actually rather cool. I didn't share this with you. I started in political science and religious studies and then flipped completely to medicine, went to pre-med and then, dropped all that stuff. But here we are both experiencing sort of late in life design and thinking about structures in medicine and how that works out. Now, you mentioned you as a kid, your father being a physician. It was very early in your mind that medicine would be part of your future, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, no, if you go back historically and look, like, I think almost every Halloween costume I ever had, like, I was a doctor. Because I was like, well, I'm going to be a doctor someday. Like, this is easy. I think one year I was a softball player, maybe. But, like, I spent a lot of time, hearing about, medicine, a lot of time in doctors' lounges, just listening to physicians talk. Like, I honestly don't know when I made a conscious decision. I think it just sort of was always sort of, going to happen. I think for me, the decision was more, what am I going to do with that? Like, how am I going to try and impact the world from the place of medicine?
Who picked the costume? You or one of your parents or what?
No, I mean, it was me driven, though. I'll be honest. If you have a family member with a closet of white coats, it becomes a very easy costume to pull off.
Yeah. I think none of my children have gone into medicine. It's probably because I gave them the wrong Halloween costumes. All right. So let's hit some of these questions and let's help our listeners understand a little bit about your journey, specifically the role of the physician advisor as our starting point. And we'll wander through this and there's a lot to explore. So would you take your best shot at explaining the role to folks who don't have physician advisors in their hospital or health system and just give sort of your elevator pitch and your experience with it?
Yeah, the physician advisor, albeit I'll be honest, is terribly named. I mean, it's not a very descriptive name, which I think leads to some of that confusion. But in a hospital or a health system, they're the physician who's supposed to be sort of at that intersection of clinical medicine and administrative work for you. So usually that means they're doing some sort of combination of work with utilization management and interfacing with your payers, your insurance companies, Medicaid, et cetera, and or interacting with the revenue cycle, appeals and denials, and or working with case management, and or working with clinical documentation and all those pesky queries that physicians get. Not every physician advisor is doing everything, but they're doing some combination of work in those spaces.
Yeah, and that laundry list, those words are familiar to me now that I've been through this. But I would submit to you when I was just starting out after my training, and for probably a solid decade, I didn't understand a word of what you just said, right?
No, I think that's true. I mean, and I think that became, like a lot of physician advisors who have worked sort of, who are a little on the older side, because the career itself is not particularly old. Most of us fell in accidentally because we didn't know that we were looking for that, because we didn't know that was a thing. And we didn't know what any of these words meant. Now it's different. Now there are physicians actually seeking out this role, which I think is a fascinating and interesting sort of turn of events. But yeah, most of us ended up sort of there accidentally because we were looking for a way to learn more about the other side of how medicine works, the business aspect of it, if that makes sense. So
yeah, no, I mean, I'm just processing because there's so many quick thoughts, right? So a lot of physician students, if you will, are lifetime learners. And so always curious, and they come across this new language and they're like, I don't understand. So you can try to read about it or just go do it, right? Both learn it and then go practice it, if you will. And I do agree with you. There's a ton of intentionality now that wasn't in existence when this role first took on a little bit of momentum, and I wonder what you might consider calling it if physician advisor is a clunky name. Have you ever thought of any alternative names?
So yeah, I've thought about it off and on. I do find that there's some places that don't call them physician advisors, and that do sort of lean into that, like medical director of, and then a more descriptive title like medical director of, CDI, or medical director of, case management, or whatever it happens to be. I do think that those terms tend to be a little bit more descriptive and easier for people to understand.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah. Now, here's a crazy thought. I was just reading about one of the new AI items that will be available to us where you can put in your AirPods and there will be a universal translation. So you could go talk to somebody who only speaks Japanese or only speaks, Spanish, and it will auto translate for you. Are you aware of this new
Yeah,
technology?
I've heard of it.
Yeah. So maybe we just need to give our physicians one earpiece. And so when the PA comes around and says, I have a query on your CDI for your CMI, it will translate for some.
No, I mean, I think a good physician advisor probably is a little bit like, they're probably not using those terms when they talk to physicians. They're probably, though I would say query probably does come up, right? Like they're probably saying, I'm coming to you about this query. And then the physician may be like, oh no, I don't want to.
Yeah, that is the natural response. What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding of the PA role generically as we are describing it?
The biggest misunderstanding, mostly from clinical colleagues, is who the physician advisor, quote unquote, works for. Like they are employed by the hospital, but really their job is to work for you. Like their job is to translate that information from the coding person who's sending you this query and you're like, I don't understand what this means. Like it would be my job to explain to you, this is the kind of thing they're looking for. This is the language that we need to be using. Or when it's, a utilization management, like, hey, the insurance company doesn't want to pay for inpatient for this patient. I'm coming to physician colleagues not to say, hey, they won't pay for inpatient, you have to downgrade them. I'm coming to physicians saying, help me understand what you see that makes you want inpatient so I can tell that story on your behalf. I think that if you see them as sort of like your mouthpiece or translation back to the translator bit, then it actually is a very powerful partnership, if that makes sense, instead of
it does. And I do think, again, back to the comment before, the name of this role, who you work for, it is very confusing to certainly our younger physicians or even our older physicians who had never encountered one before. There's sort of this middle ground where a lot of people have gotten used to it. If you've been a hospitalist for at least a decade, you're beginning to understand all this just by osmosis. But the newer doctors and the doctors who haven't adapted to the world order, yeah, I think that's a great representation of being a translator and working on behalf of the physician, ultimately on behalf of the patient. And then all that back office documentation, all those other things have to happen, all of which is for the benefit of the outcome of the patient. It's a cool thing in its own way.
Yeah. I mean, I pivoted away from, I did like physician wellness work for a while. And I actually left that work because I felt that being a physician advisor was a more impactful way to make my colleagues' jobs better. Like I was reducing their stress more by taking over some of these terrible administrative tasks that they didn't want to do. And so it felt like I was actually improving the sort of work life of the people I knew more in that space.
Well, that's cool. I've never heard anybody say it that way. So let's talk a little bit about your role as president and CEO of the American College of Physician Advisors. So we'll come back to that wellness concept in a minute. You recently ended that term, but tell us how you sort of found yourself in that role, and then we'll explore that a little bit more.
Well, I mean, when I started out as a physician advisor, I mean, my thought was, well, there has to be a group, right? Like I'm an internist. There's the American College of Physicians. That's my professional home and my group. Like there's got to be something for this. And so I started by Googling. I was like, physician advisor, organization. I found the American College of Physician Advisors. Not as early as I probably should have, but, did find them and was very excited to find like all these other physicians doing similar work. And at one point, they needed a vice president of member engagement because they had, social media and some other sort of, internet things to do. And I was like, well, I'm kind of young. Like, I know how the internet works. Like, I'll just put my name and see what happens.
You might be the only one on the planet left who understands how the internet works. But besides that,
and so I was like, thinking there's no way, but this will be a good way. Like, it'll be a good experience. There's no bad outcome from trying out for something that you're interested in. That's my philosophy anyway.
Yeah.
And I was pleasantly surprised when they're like, no, we think that you really do have the skills that we're looking for. And I spent several years as the vice president of member engagement, talking to physician advisors all throughout the country, hearing their stories, learning what, was bothering them, learning about their struggles, but also learning about sort of the things that connected everyone, the sort of similar themes. Membership grew a lot as we were trying to sort of bring people together. And then, it was time for our president to step down, and they said, who's ready? And the board sort of made a decision that it was me.
Yeah, that's always a treat, right? For your Halloween candy basket there. Now, how many members approximately are in the College of Physician Advisors?
Today it's probably about 1,400.
Okay. And also you were titled the CEO as well. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, well, so this is more than we need to get into today, but the structure of ACPA was a little bit confusing. It wasn't quite sort of what I expected in terms of like the board and then the separate sort of like administrative, like sort of like a hospital, right? Like you've got your board of directors for fiduciary oversight, but then you also have like the CEO who runs things and all the people. At the time that I joined, it was very much the board was both. So it was both the, oversight, but also the doers, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And we actually just, one of my projects actually was to unravel that. And so we finally just passed some bylaws to sort of separate that. So in essence, saying that you were president of the board of directors wasn't quite a sufficient or accurate term to explain the fact that like, hey, I'm not just presiding over meetings every several months to like oversee things. It's like, no, I'm the person who's in charge of sort of the way that the college is running.
Yeah. And, a classic concept in board structure is the president is the person who does the operations. The CEO is where the buck stops. The buck stops here. And some people have both responsibilities. And to your point, a board can be either governing or the fiduciary agent or the managing board, where they're doing sort of that a little bit of micromanagement of the administration. It sounds like at one point, the board was governing and managing. And like you said, you tried to unravel that, right?
Yeah. I mean, because the ACPA itself at this point is 11 years old. It's not a super old organization, because the profession itself is not super old. And so at the time the pool of people doing that work was quite small. And the college was quite small. And as we've grown, we've just sort of had to, I think, adapt to those changing needs and times.
And to an extent, because medicine as a organized body is just slow to change. There's a lot of rapid changes in our medical knowledge and the things that we're doing. But in many ways, this is in the history of medicine, at least in the United States, it's kind of like a startup. It is just still evolving into whatever it may be. And the structure of healthcare created this necessity to have both the physician advisors and that professional society, if you will. What big changes occurred under your term, maybe one or two that you're most proud of that you want to talk about?
Sure. I think the things that I am most excited about are the things that we were able to get done during my term. The work had obviously started before, you know what I mean, and we'll continue onwards, but were related to things that we'd heard from members that they wanted. So the first was, we launched what we call the certification exams. You can become ACPA certified. We have a set of modules you can take if you want to sort of learn from the beginning, and then you can take the exam. Or if you've been working for a long time, you can sort of skip straight to the exam. But it was the first time there was a sort of what I would consider a practical exam for physician advisors, something that wasn't just like, repeat to me like the date that this law was passed, but tell me, like, do you understand how status determinations work? Do you understand, what these different notices from Medicare mean? Do you understand, what an MCC for a CDI would be? Like something that was sort of practical and was written by physician advisors or written by physician advisors in the college for us and for our colleagues, which I thought was, in hindsight, sort of an ambitious undertaking given the size that we were, but has been received very, very well. People have said that they think it's great, and it sort of achieved our purpose, which is there's a lot of people to, what we talked about before, who want to potentially get into physician advisor work, but they don't necessarily know what that means or don't have a way to sort of show, a potential employer that they've done some work to try and, skill up or learn those things. So this becomes a nice way for people to to learn more about what this work might mean without committing them to switching their job full time.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's phenomenal. I think, you then in an executive role become the translator of what the PA role and function and value add is to hospitals and hospital systems by creating all that structure. I think that's really something I think you should be proud of all of that. I think that's materially important. Any idea of whether or not AI will accelerate or facilitate how the PA functions going forward?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that already, especially in the area. So it's sort of twofold. So one, you see a lot of AI in the primary clinical documentation space,
Hmm.
which, I think everybody sort of thinks will have some impact into sort of, are we going to get better capture of those things on the front end, which requires less work of the physician advisor and, clinical and coding staff on the back end to sort of fix those documentation errors. I think at this point, it's a little early to say. There's also been a lot of AI work in that sort of revenue cycle appeals and denials thing. Like you can tell insurance, I mean, there have been some cases about that, right? Like where payers use AI to sort of, deny things. They use AI
Shocking. I mean, I've never heard of such an idea, but please go on.
to send letters back, and I think now from a provider side, people are going, could I use AI to make sure that my letters to the insurance company are better?
Yeah,
I think you have to be careful. I think some people sort of went really in and like, okay, we'll just have the computers talk to each other. The insurance company
sure.
will have their AI talk to our AI. And it's like, no, there's still a very big role for physicians in all of this to make sure
Yeah,
things are correct. You can't remove yourself, but it
yeah.
can make you more efficient potentially.
Well, so that goes back to this wellness concept where you realize for yourself you could have more of an impact by shifting into this function of the PA rather than what you were doing before. It would seem to me that hospitals that are struggling with the workload and the throughput, that a wellness committee, if you will, while it's still okay to offer places for people to relax and unwind. A lot of people are quick to say, don't give them just yoga mats and pizza parties. Well, there's still a role for that kind of stuff, but functionally, day in and day out, a wellness committee should have a PA in my mind, and your informaticists. Because they're ingrained in workflow. And that's that unraveling of that workflow of trying to lift those burdens, make it easier, support the physician to have more time with the patient or more time for that critical thinking, or to your point, the checks and balance on the scribing and the AI and making sure that things are going in the, because AI on, each other, there's no check and balance today.
Mhm.
So giving people the time and space to do that work, I think would be a wellness activity. What do you think of my structure as
Yeah,
I
no,
say
I
that?
think that is really insightful and I think is probably correct because if you look at, what physicians say, hey, this is why I'm burned out or this is why I have moral injury and this is what's bothering me. Like some things that, a wellness committee might do might temporize that. But if the issue is like, look, man, I find joy in seeing patients and I'm spending more time charting and sitting at a computer than I'm sitting with people, like no amount of other stuff is going to fix that fact that you're not doing the things that bring you like happiness and fulfillment and make you feel like this is why I became a doctor in the first
Yeah,
place.
yeah, yeah. No, I love what you're saying. This just resonates so deeply with me because what I've learned in my leadership career is one of the things great leaders do is they identify the barriers and the obstacles and tear them down. And they restructure things to make it better instead of just walking around preaching, shaking fingers, taking credit for other people's work, which it's a great example of a toxic leader. You really just need to help lift people up to be the best that they can be. And to that point, and to your earlier point, not everyone is actually wired to go sit with patients for that extra 10 or 12 minutes.
Yeah.
They are more excited to dig into CDI. They are more excited to battle and UR and get it right. They're just because you got the degree that you're called a doctor, you may be excited about different things. And I think we need to be very open about this and let water seek that level that it seeks to achieve. What are your thoughts on those statements?
Yeah, no, I think that that's absolutely true. And I think it's funny. During residency, I remember there were a couple people and they were quite clear. They're like, I like seeing patients, but like, that's not what excites me. Like, the research is what excites me, or the teaching
Right.
of other residents is what excites me. And like, it felt like at the time that there was almost like a, like, you can't say that you don't love taking care of people. Like, you
Yeah.
gotta say that, that's your inside thought, not your outside thought. But to be fair, that is people like me. Like, I love taking care of people, but I never intended to make that my full-time 100% career. And I knew that coming into this. Where I ended up was a little bit different than where I thought I was going to be, but it fulfills the same underlying thing that, motivates me, which is I like to make systems work better. I like to fix things, break things, rebuild them for patients, because I love patients and I love taking care of them, but also for healthcare workers, for physicians, for my colleagues. Like, that's my job.
Yeah, no. See, I tend to think that the House of Medicine is in need of renovation, but we need to recognize some of us are carpenters, and I don't mean the orthopedic I'm not dissing the orthopedic doctors, but some of us are scientists, right? And we like to do the HVAC and the engineering of the house. And some of us really just want to lay that carpet down and make it look pristine. We're all different, but we do find ourselves in that bracket called medicine. And we could probably do a better job because we understand the nature of the practice of medicine. If you've never practiced it, studied it, learned it, it's a lot harder to make it better. And not to say that non-clinical leaders can't do it, but they're handicapped. I have to tell you, they have other traits and qualities, and their brains wire in certain ways to make it better. But physicians can do a darn good job. And I'm all about that, if that can happen.
And I think we as a profession have done ourselves a little bit of a disservice, because I do feel like generations past were much more active in the shaping of their environment and their work life. And we've become much more passive and said, hey, somebody else is taking care of that. I don't need to worry about that. And the answer is you can, but you may not end up with a system that you like, because the motivations have a lot of overlap, but they're not completely aligned.
Yeah.
And that's just human nature.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more cerebral about the role as chief medical officer, right, of the South Dakota Medicaid. Tell us a little bit about that role and the challenges that you face, and how your relationship with the PA history, did that help you, hurt you, make no difference? Bring that all together for us.
Well, I thought it was going to help me a lot. Like, to me, it felt like sort of I was in a place where I had been working as a physician advisor for a while. We had done sort of, back to, I like to build and create things. So we had gotten the physician advisor structure in that system to a place where I was like, I'm pretty happy. This is working pretty well. Obviously, there's still work to do, but it's not the big work that I had been doing before. And I feel like I need to get a peek sort of behind the curtain. Like, how does it work from a payer side, from a government side? Because you spend all this time sort of like, railing against the rules. Like, why is it this way? This doesn't make sense. You're like, I'm just going to have to see it for myself so that, I understand better how to move the needle where I feel like it needs to move. And I really thought that all of that experience and was going to be like, oh man, I'm just going to step into this and it's going to be a perfect fit. And it actually, was a lot more challenging than I expected it to be, but that in a good way, that there was just so much more to learn about sort of the actual, processes involved in okay, how does a payer pay the claim? Like, what processes does it need to go through? Why do these checks and balances exist in the first place? I admit I was one of those physicians, years and years past. I was like, why do prior authorizations even exist? Like, I only ever order tests that are appropriate. Like, this doesn't make sense to me. And then you get to the other side and you're like, oh, okay. One person may be doing things 100% correct, but not everybody is. And it doesn't even have to be, fraud. It can just be like waste and mistakes. You know what I mean? Well, some of these processes exist, maybe not specifically for you, but for a larger system. And so getting, I think, more exposure to that was really, really useful.
So look, as an independent, autonomous agent of practicing the art of medicine, which is what we're trained to do. Now, it's much more team sport today, especially on a hospitalist role or in the intensive care unit. You have that multidisciplinary, right? You talk to the pharmacist, the respiratory therapist, case management as you're going from room to room. Much more of a team sport than ever before. However, there are only so many slices of that pizza pie out there for every practicing doctor. It is not an unlimited amount of resources and money. So one strange way of looking at this is we're all fighting over the same nickel. So when you and I are seeing patients in different parts of the state, for example, that nickel can only go 5 different ways, period, end of discussion, unless somebody wants to change the tax situation in the state, the borrowing of the state, other ways to obtain more funding, which becomes political and social, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact of the matter is we're not all going to get a nickel. 5 of us are each going to get a penny. That's all there is to it. So, so I'm not in agreement with prior auths, but they make sense from that logical perspective. We just want to make sure that everybody should get the penny that they're asking for, because if we spend 6 cents and we only have 5, we have a problem here. And if your training at Pittsburgh was so amazing that you think that you deserve 2 pennies, well, I'm telling you, there's still only 1 penny per doc. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really good way to put it, is that, I tell my nurses, like, we're in the yes business. Like, I'm not working for shareholders. I'm not trying to save a bunch of money, for a third party. Like, I work for the government. So the money I have is the people's money, right?
That's
I'm
right.
just trying to make sure it's used the best way that we can, given that there is not, like you pointed out, an infinite amount of it.
That's right. And that's where I think on that commercial and that private side, it's much more difficult to talk about, and we won't go there, but that's where denials and AI letter writing and this mishmash of trying to stop the money from flowing is very different outside of the government. But the government's job is no easier because it's limited. I mean, if you and I were to run a private health plan, we'd go out and raise capital however we want to. The state cannot just summarily raise more money. It's not that simple, right?
That's exactly right. Our interests are different as the state versus sort of other payers, but the ultimate philosophy of, like, look, because there's only so much money, you have to make sure that you're trying to use it the best way that you can.
So this is your full-time role now, in addition to the hospitalist shifts that you take. Are there any other roles that we haven't talked about that you're also doing?
I mean, that's enough for now. Now that I still, no, I mean, finishing up the American College of Physician Advisors, I think that was a big chunk of my time. So trying to do all 3 of them at once was a lot.
Yeah. Well, hey, you're the kid who did poli-sci and chemistry. So as far as I'm concerned, I think you're selling yourself short. You should do more stuff.
I make the joke that I don't know that I've ever just done 1.0 FTE in my life. I don't think I would know what to do with myself. I think my kids have my time. Thanks for me to do.
Yeah, you music to my ears, because I didn't realize when I was working, I was about a 2.5. I just never knew it. And I went to part-time and I found out that's what a 1.0 is. And so most of the world works at a different pace than people like you and me.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
It's fascinating. I mean, I love it. I think, everything I'm doing, I'm like, everything has a purpose, everything has a role. So I'm going to keep doing it this way. But
so what are some key things that an aspiring physician leader should be thinking about if as they hear this and they go, oh, I'm wired for systems and system change and design thinking, how might they begin to create a path of intentionality? What suggestions do you have if they might want to get into the world of physician advising?
yeah, so I think there's practical things you can do, and then there's sort of like learning or educational things you can do. I mean, obviously, ACPA has a lot of resources. There's a lot of modules that exist. You can either do, like the whole bundle, or you can just do one, and say, hey, I just want to learn a little bit about this topic, and sort of dip your toes in. If you want to learn from a practical standpoint, like I think a lot of physicians, especially hospital-based physicians, find, the UR committee of your hospital to be a good entry point. and say, hey, usually they're looking for volunteers to serve on these committees, right? Like usually they're not beating people away. To say, hey, I'd like to volunteer to sit on the UR committee. And usually out of those meetings, you'll find something like a project or a problem. And then you can sort of say, hey, you know what? I'd like to step into a position and help tackle that problem.
Yeah. If you pass the mini mental status exam, like you seriously want to be on this committee? Yeah. No, I think that's a great suggestion. And probably if there's a separate working group on CDI too, like get involved in that work. That's a great way to do that. What have you done along the way to improve your own physician leadership? Well, we can even forget physician. Your leadership skills. What have you done for yourself?
Oh, I tend to sort of go back and forth between what I consider like sort of like active, trying to work on my physician leadership skills versus sort of more passive, learning, if that makes sense. So like sometimes the answer is like, look, if you want to work on your leadership skills, like pivot your role in a place where you're challenged to do things you've never done before. So for me, like, hey, I wasn't working in a health system, which, I love health systems. But like a lot of them set up things so that physicians work in dyads, right? So usually there's somebody administratively like doing stuff alongside you. And for me, I was like, I really want to know that I can do all of those things. Like I want to know that I can, manage FTEs, manage the budget, like make those administrative decisions on my own. I guess what I need to do is I need to pivot to a role like, Medicaid, for example, where I don't have a dyad and I'm in charge of my own lines myself. So you can learn just by doing and saying, hey, this is the thing that I haven't done. Like, how do I get that experience and finding a place to sort of do it? That tends to be sort of, learning by fire.
Well, that's why we call this the fire chief. Okay, let's be fair about this. Nobody teaches you how to be a chief medical officer, and only in the last decade are people teaching how to become a physician advisor, right? So it is trial by fire. It's on the job training, right?
But, there's also like, more deliberate things, like I think I've read, probably every physician leader book that exists out there trying to sort of glean things, but also like non-physician leader books, right? Like you learn about leadership, from back to poli-sci, like there was a leadership minor and I took a lot of those classes, trying to sort of say, okay, well, where are the best lessons that we can learn from politics, from industry, from the military, from wherever we can learn them about sort of how you help people, how you serve them through a leadership role.
That's outstanding advice. I do think, and I agree, stretching outside of your comfort zone is a great way just to learn. Your brain, the neuroplasticity, the new skills, they're very important, which goes hand in hand to reading about leadership from all domains, because I do think it's a requirement of leadership. It was taught to me. It's not my original idea. You must be a lifelong learner. Now, you may learn visually, you may listen to books, you may read them, but it is not enough to just have the title, then just walk around and do stuff. You have to always be staying a little bit ahead and learning new ways to new challenges that are ambiguous sometimes. The answer is not like the Krebs cycle or calculating the GFR. I mean, where we learn these mathematical, empiric, and objective things, leadership is much more ambiguous. Have you encountered that?
Yeah. And knowing the right answer and being able to do it are not the same thing, right? Like sometimes I'll be like, oh, this is the right thing to do, but I didn't do it that way. I messed up this time. I forgot the thing that I read, which is why you have to practice, to sort of give yourself a little bit of grace and say, yeah, I didn't hit 100% on that time, but I'm going to take that and I'm going to learn from that and do better in the future.
Yeah, you also learn a lot about forgiveness, giving grace, just listening. Those are all part of what we learn as we become competent clinicians, but then we tend to forget it later in life that it's just as important in the leader role. So I have an idea that I've cooked up, and we'll put it out there publicly, and you're my expert, so you tell me about this. So you know how the first time you begin to talk to your hospitalists about how they'll be measured and evaluated on their own length of stay? You've had this conversation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The deflation in your voice says it all.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because like I've never as a physician advisor had to go to a physician and say that, but I have certainly been a hospitalist and had like my leaders come to me and be like, here's your score sheet. Here's your
Yeah.
length of stay.
Okay, fair enough. Here's your score sheet. We're keeping score. It's a golf match. By the way, physician advisor pathway, is that a pathway to becoming a chief medical officer in your opinion?
I think it is. I think it's actually a really good one. I don't know that every health system sees it the same way that I see it.
Yeah.
Nationally, I've had many physician advisors that I know that are not physician advisors anymore because they are CMOs or chief clinical officers, or even, some of them have aspirations to be CEOs someday.
Yeah, I think that it is a very good potential. And to your point, if you're in a 50-bed, critical access hospital, there's probably no role for the PA. The CMO probably, whoever the physician in charge is, probably does all that work in a small hospital. But the bigger hospitals or the bigger systems, there's a lot of value in it. And I encourage CMOs to fight for getting FTEs for PAs. I think it helps the CMO. It helps, like you said, you as a CMO manage the FTE, the physician advisor might manage a medical director. It's a very good learning process. And if you have come from a specialty, the ED docs and hospitalists, they kind of know how hospitals run, but sometimes you're an OBGYN or you're a surgical specialist, you might lose track of how the hospital works. Becoming a PA is a great way, like you said, revenue cycle, rules. What does all this overnight stay mean, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So here we go back to this crucial conversation that somebody's having with a hospitalist who says, well, it's not my fault. I discharged them on the day that I came on service. And that's because the doctor before me did such a lousy job. That's why they stayed 8 days. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, here's what I offer up as a tentative solution. Have you ever had the fortune of staying at a Ritz-Carlton?
Yes.
You hesitated to answer.
Where was that? And I was like, oh yeah, that's what it was. It was a Ritz.
And at the Ritz, they tend to want to hand you, an item, a card with both hands that come around from behind the desk. And it is my understanding that they really develop the culture at the Ritz of everybody who works there is there for the guest, or their client or the customer. And if I'm not mistaken, everybody who works in that particular hotel, they're given a discretionary fund for every fiscal or calendar year. There was something was wrong with the mini fridge in the room. Something wasn't right with the air conditioning, and so they can spend this discretionary fund and give them a free bottle of champagne or something to make the experience better. And each individual has this autonomy to spend this. I want to develop the length of stay bank account for every hospitalist. And you have a discretionary fund of between 5 and 10 days or 15 days for either a quarter or a year. And somebody could do the math. And when you get into a street fight with somebody who, quote, stayed too long, that doctor can say, I'm going to use my bank account and I want to apply 10 days because there was no way we were getting this patient out. And if you're going to use the arithmetic length of stay, not geometric, I don't want this to count against me. So I want to spend my 10 days down and make it a 5-day length of stay. How do you think this idea will be received?
I think that that's an interesting and novel idea. I think ultimately the thing that physicians don't love, though, is they don't love being held to metrics that they can't control, right? And sometimes the length of stay is on you because the patient was going through. And you were like, look, I just wanted to do these extra tests that were outpatient tests and it was convenient and I did it. That's a thing. That's on the physician. But sometimes it's like, look, man, they need a long-term care bed. I've been done with them for a week. I need, and it's not even case management's fault because they've been trying too. It's just the state of medicine has given us a lot of rocks or stumbling blocks to discharge that, are big problems to solve. They're not like individual patient level.
Okay,
problems.
fine. So I'll have a SNF bank account where there were no beds, and I'll take a debit on my SNF days. And I really wanted to treat this patient a certain way. I wanted to know that every test was okay. I was so afraid they were going to leave the hospital and they'd have a stroke on me. And I wanted to make sure everything was done. Then you cash out 5 days and you don't get the attribution. How fun would that be? It would actually make
I'm going to spend it. Yeah. No, I like the concept, though, of being able to sort of give the doctor back some autonomy to say, I made this decision and you're going to have to be okay with it because
That's right. That's exactly right.
And I do think that if you're a good physician advisor or you're a good leader, like those are things you're listening to where you're like, look, man, I thought that this was important. I needed to do it. And then it might be the physician advisor's job or the CMO's job to be like, okay, I got your back on this one. Like, I hear what you're saying and I support.
So when you see Lee's length of stay, savings, bank, and trust, you heard it here first.
Oh, no. Yeah.
And, I'll be looking for board of director individuals. So we'll be giving you a call because you have the experience. All right. Well, this has been a great show. A lot of fun, very insightful, a lot of leadership lessons here. And this podcast is seriously, it's all about sharing the messiness of U.S. healthcare, what physician leaders can do about it, and your experiences, your learned lessons, your insights, they undoubtedly manifest into leadership skills for the listeners, most of whom who have prominent roles in healthcare and they're aspiring to those roles. So thank you again. A thank you to the unsung heroes known as physician advisors. Any last comments before we wrap the show?
No, I just think that people, it's fascinating to me to see how this physician advisor role has evolved. I think if people are interested even a little bit, I think it's worth sort of learning more about. And I think if you're a chief medical officer, there's really no way for you to not understand these concepts. They're so ingrained in what CMOs need to be sort of aware of that if you have a physician advisor that works with you, like you should spend some time with them. And if you don't, you might want to advocate getting one.
Yep, I agree. Well, everyone, you have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. Want to learn more about what it is like to be a CMO or a physician advisor? Check out our website, thefirechiefcmo.com, and connect with me on LinkedIn. I love talking with CMOs, especially ones that are helping to advance physician leaders every day. So get out there, be a chief or perhaps a physician advisor. And in the words of Sergeant Phil Esterhaus, don't forget, let's be careful out there.